This country is so dirty that you won't believe what they do daily. Well, today, you're going to learn about the 14 dirtiest countries in the world in 2024. Among them, India, occupying an impressive second place, where shocking scenes happen in the streets, like women defecating openly. Get ready, as this list will leave you jaw-dropped. Are you ready to discover who's at the top of this ranking? Join us, and let's go. Number 14, Indonesia. Indonesia, also known for its beautiful beaches and lush forests, now faces an unprecedented environmental crisis. The air Indonesians breathe is a toxic cocktail of pollutant. Jakarta, the capital, is the epicenter of this calamity. In this place, people wake up every day in a city where the sky is perpetually gray, the smell of gasoline and factory smoke permeating the air. Moreover, wearing a mask is a daily necessity just to breathe. Air pollution claims the lives of approximately 232,000 Indonesians annually. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Water pollution causes 6,400 deaths. Workplace pollutants are responsible for over 16,300 deaths, and exposure to lead, mainly from gasoline emissions, leads to the death of 32,800. Rampant deforestation further aggravates the situation. In less than half a century, almost 40% of the country's forest cover has been decimated, pushing countless species to the brink of extinction and destroying the way of life of indigenous communities. The Indonesian government is trying to reverse this grim picture. They have set the ambitious goal of having more than 500,000 electric vehicles on the roads by 2030 and promised not to build new coal-fired power plants from 2023. However, the current reality is disheartening. 10 coal-fired power plants still operate within a 100 kilometers radius of Jakarta, continuing to pump harmful pollutants into the air. Indonesia is at a crossroads. Will it be able to balance economic development with environmental preservation, or is this tropical paradise doomed? An example of ecological devastation. Number 13, Qatar. Often celebrated as one of the richest countries in the world, hides a dirty secret. The scarcity of drinking water is a chronic problem. With a population that has already surpassed 2 million people and is growing rapidly, Qatar struggles to provide clean water for both its inhabitants and its expanding industry. The construction boom and exponentially growing aviation are the main villains of pollution in the country. During the 2022 World Cup, Qatar was heavily criticized for the excessive number of flights. Qatar Airways alone operated about 60 daily flights between Doha and Dubai on game days. According to FIFA, air transport was responsible for almost 52% of the event's total emission. Despite these problems, Qatar is making efforts for a more sustainable future. During the Paris climate talks in 2015, the country committed to reducing its emissions by 25%. By 2030, recently, a solar power plant was connected to the national grid, capable of providing up to 10% of Qatar's clean energy needs when at full capacity. Doha, the capital, has introduced a modern metro system and developed more green spaces and parks. But will these measures be enough to compensate for decades of environmental neglect? Another question that hangs in the air is this: are you already subscribed to our channel? If not, take the opportunity to subscribe now. Take advantage of the fact that it only takes 3 seconds. Well, now that you've done that, let's continue the video. Number 12, Bahrain. Bahrain, with a population of just over 1.3 million, faces environmental challenges disproportionate to its size. In 2018, the average concentration of PM 2.5 reached the alarming level of 60 micrograms per cubic meter, 6 times higher than the safe limit established by the World Health Organization. There was a brief improvement in 2020, when levels fell to just under 40 micrograms per cubic meter. However, this progress was ephemeral. In 2022, PM 2.5 levels skyrocketed again, surpassing 66 micrograms per cubic meter, or retreating to about 39 in 2023. This pollution roller coaster is mainly driven by Bahrain's expanding energy sector, which heavily relies on fossil fuels. Industrial emissions and dust also contribute significantly to the problem. Number 11, China. China, with its population of over 1 billion people, faces a titanic battle against pollution. Despite significant efforts in the last decade to improve the environment, the situation took a worrying turn in 2023. Recent data reveals that the average concentration of PM 2.5 particles rose to 32.5 micrograms per cubic meter, an alarming increase compared to previous years. This level is more than 6 times higher than recommended by the United Nations, placing China among the 20 most polluted regions in the world. China's rapid industrial growth, which made it the world's second-largest economy, came at a huge environmental cost. The air quality in many Chinese cities now exposes children to pollution levels equivalent to smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Beijing, the capital, along with other major cities, remains shrouded in a dense layer of smog, especially during the winter months. China holds the unwanted title of the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, even surpassing the United States in total carbon dioxide emissions. Despite the government's commitment to reach peak carbon emissions by 2026 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, the recent wave of approvals for new coal-fired power plants threatens to derail these goals. Pollution in China is not just a local problem, but a global threat that affects the climate of the entire planet. Number 10. Peru. In Peru, the legendary land of gold, while its pristine forests and mountain canyons remain almost untouched, the cities tell a different story. La Oroya, for example, is considered one of the most polluted cities in the world. Since 1922, La Oroya has been home to a copper smelter, followed by lead and zinc refineries. The toxic gases and heavy metals released by these facilities contaminate the air, water, and soil alarmingly. Imagine a place where 99% of children have blood lead levels above the safety limit. This is the harsh reality of La Oroya. Illegal mining further aggravates the situation. Rivers and lakes receive direct discharges of untreated wastewater, while agricultural chemicals seep into the soil. The result? A toxic cocktail that threatens the health of an entire nation. And as if that weren't enough, Peru faces increasingly severe natural disasters. In April 2024, the country recorded 120 deaths from dengue, with over 117,000 cases reported. With the El Niño phenomenon approaching, Peruvians seem to be plunging into increasingly darker days. Number 9. Mongolia. You ever imagined a country famous for its vast grasslands turning into a desert? Welcome to Mongolia. This landlocked Asian country, squeezed between 2 superpowers, is facing an unprecedented environmental crisis. Unlike the idyllic images of rolling prairies filled with cattle, the Mongolian reality is quite different. What you'll find are desertified lands, rivers polluted by mining, and increasingly scarce vegetation. Every spring, icy winds from Siberia transform the country into an apocalyptic scenario, with sandstorms that darken the sky and devastate everything in their path. More than 70% of Mongolian territory faces some degree of desertification. The arid climate and high altitude make it difficult to retain moisture. But the real villain in this story? Mongolian people themselves. The livestock industry, vital to the country's economy, is literally devouring the land. In 2019, the total number of farm animals reached a staggering 70.9 million, 33 million more than the carrying capacity of the pastures. In some regions, the number of animals is 7 times greater than the environment can support. Uncontrolled mining further aggravates the problem. Toxic waste is dumped without treatment, poisoning the soil and water resources. And the solution seems distant. After all, besides livestock and mining, Mongolia has few economic options. Number 8. Kenya. If you think dirt is just a matter of lack of hygiene, Kenya will change your perspective. In this African country, filth is a direct reflection of the extreme poverty that plagues millions of people. The ultimate symbol of this reality is the Kibera slum in Nairobi. Imagine a place where 2 million people live without access to clean water, hospitals, toilets, or garbage collection. In this desolate scenario, 50 families share a single public bathroom. That is when they're lucky enough to have access to one. The lack of basic infrastructure leads to desperate solutions. Many residents use plastic bags as flying toilets, discarding them randomly in the streets. The result? Mountains of garbage and excrement that accumulate, becoming continuous sources of contamination. Water, precious resource, is a luxury in Kibera. There are no taps, and residents depend on rain not only to wash themselves but for all daily needs. This water, often contaminated, becomes a vehicle for deadly diseases. In Kenyan cities, even the air you breathe can be a threat. Simple breeze can carry the stench of bacteria and garbage, an almost unique pollution attack in the world. You visit Kenya, be prepared. Tourist guides advise not to wear very nice clothes and to protect your skin well. Ironically, Kenya has an extremely rich and diverse natural environment. For millions of its inhabitants, this natural beauty remains a distant dream. Number 7. Chad. Chad, an African country rich in natural resources such as oil, natron, and gold, should be an example of prosperity. However, the reality is quite different from what was expected. The lack of modern extraction technology and the serious problem of illegal mining and smuggling turn these resources into poison for the country itself. Chad's air, water, and soil are paying a high price, for this unbridled exploitation. Think of a vicious cycle. The more Chad depends on resource extraction, the more pollution is generated. During the oil extraction process, for example, leaks are common, contaminating vast areas of soil. And with poor road infrastructure and public security problems, these accidents are even more frequent and devastating. Water, already scarce in Chad, faces an unprecedented crisis. Lake Chad, which was once a vital source of life for the region, is slowly dying due to pollution and overdevelopment. Imagine thousands of people losing access to safe drinking water, while the ecosystem around them collapses. To make matters worse, Chad is losing the battle against desertification. Sandstorms are becoming more frequent and intense, swallowing fertile lands and threatening the country's already fragile biodiversity. It's like watching a desert advancing relentlessly, day after day. The Chadian government is not oblivious to these problems, but its efforts to combat them are like trying to put out a forest fire with a glass of water. The magnitude of the environmental challenge seems to far exceed the resources and political will available to face it. Number 6. Saudi Arabia. Who would have thought that one of the richest countries in the world would also be one of the most polluted? This is Saudi Arabia, a country where oil wealth walks hand in hand with an alarming environmental crisis. The scenario is surreal. On one side, futuristic skyscrapers and luxury shopping malls. On the other, air so polluted that breathing becomes a daily challenge. Saudi industries, fueled by the abundance of oil, dump massive amounts of pollutants into the air, water, and soil. And despite existing environmental laws, widespread corruption makes their enforcement a bad joke. But nature also conspires against the Saudis. In the country, it's quite common to wake up and find your house covered by a thick layer of sand. This is not fiction, but everyday life in many Saudi cities. Sandstorms, increasingly frequent due to climate change, not only suffocate the lungs of residents, but also severely damage the little vegetation that manages to survive in this hostile environment. Water, or rather the lack of it, is another critical problem. Saudi Arabia is one of the driest countries in the world. To get around this, the country invests heavily in desalination plants. Seems like a smart solution, right? Wrong. These plants are real energy-consuming monsters, burning absurd amounts of fossil fuels and releasing even more pollutants into the air. And what do they do with the salt extracted from seawater? They dump it back into the ocean, creating a marine ecological disaster. In recent years, Saudis have faced heat waves so intense they seem straight out of an apocalyptic movie. Thousands of people are hospitalized and many die due to extreme heat. The government's response? Throw money at the problem, proposing high-tech solutions that seem more like science fiction than reality. Number 5. Nigeria. Nigeria is like that sad story of King Midas. Everything it touches turns to gold, but at what cost? This African giant, blessed with fertile lands and vast oil reserves, has become one of the most polluted and dangerous places on the planet. There, you can harvest 3 crops a year in some regions. Sounds like paradise, doesn't it? Now imagine that same paradise soaked in oil, with rivers black with oil and air heavy with toxic smoke. That's the Nigerian reality. The numbers are breathtaking. In just 1 decade, from 2011 to 2021, the Niger Delta region suffered almost 10,000 oil spills. That means more than 2 spills per day, every day for 10 years. The result? More than 466,000 barrels of oil spilled into the environment. To get an idea, it's as if an Olympic-sized pool full of oil was dumped into nature every few months. But cold numbers don't tell the whole story. In 1998, in the village of Jesse, near Lagos, one of the most horrible accidents in Nigerian history, pipeline leak caused an explosion that killed more than 1,000 people. Many of the victims were trying to collect the leaked oil, so desperate were they for any source of income. It's an image that tragically summarizes the toxic relationship between Nigeria and its oil, and the nightmare continues. In 2011, a leak from a Shell platform dumped 40,000 barrels of oil into the Atlantic Ocean. The result? More than 168,000 people in 350 communities were affected. Think about it. Entire families losing their livelihoods overnight, fishermen with no fish to catch, farmers with unusable land. The price Nigerians pay for this pollution is calculated not just in money, but in years of life. In the Niger Delta, life expectancy is only 41 years, 10 years less than the national average. Number 4. Congo. Imagine a country so rich in minerals that it could be the setting for a modern fairy tale. Now, imagine that same country sinking in mountains of garbage and rivers of pollution. Let's talk about Congo. Congo is like a treasure chest full of riches. Gold, cobalt, and other precious metals abound in the subsoil. Gold alone brings the country more than $40 million a year. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But the reality on Congolese streets tells a very different story. In Congolese cities, garbage accumulates on the streets as if it were part of the urban landscape. There are no trash cans, no regular collection. The result? Mountains of garbage that become incubators of disease. And here comes the most shocking part. Due to the lack of public toilets, many people use these piles of garbage as improvised toilets. It's hard to imagine, but it's the harsh reality for millions of Congolese. You might ask, how can a country so rich in resources live like this? The answer is a toxic mix of colonialism, corporate greed, and corruption. Large Western companies take most of the profits from mining, leaving crumbs for the Congolese people. The little that remains is swallowed up by civil wars or pocketed by local tyrants. In the end, almost nothing reaches the legitimate government or the people. We can say that Congo lives in a grotesque environmental paradox. On one side, mountains of garbage in the cities. On the other side, vast areas of land ruined by unbridled mining. Congolese are trapped between these two extremes, struggling to survive in an increasingly hostile environment. Number 3. Somalia. Somalia is known worldwide for its pirates. But what few people know is that these pirates were originally honest fishermen and farmers. What transformed them? A story of pollution and despair that seems straight out of an environmental horror movie. In the 1980s, while the world celebrated advances in nuclear energy, Somalia became Europe's secret nuclear waste. Unscrupulous companies and the mafia, taking advantage of the weakness of the Somali government, dumped tons of nuclear waste into the country's waters. Imagine the scenario. One day you're a fisherman, the next, your sea is full of invisible poison. The result was catastrophic. Fishermen contracted mysterious diseases. Children were born with deformities. The fish, a source of food and income, simply disappeared. And the worst part? Nobody knows exactly where this toxic waste was dumped, making cleanup almost impossible. As if that wasn't enough, Somalia became the world's dumping ground. International ships, passing through its waters, freely dump all kinds of pollutants. It's as if the country had a giant target painted on its coast, saying, "Dump your trash here." Faced with this apocalyptic scenario, some Somali fishermen made a desperate choice. They became pirates, not out of greed, for sheer survival. Number 2. India. Now let's talk about the country you've been expecting to hear about since you clicked on this video. Let's talk about India. India prides itself on being the world's largest democracy, vibrant and powerful nation. But there's one title that no one disputes with it. One of the dirtiest countries on the planet. We can say that India is divided into two countries. On one side, cutting-edge technology and economic growth. On the other, a sanitary crisis of unimaginable proportion. Let's look at the numbers and brace yourself, because they are breathtaking. In a country of over 1 billion people, only 46.9% of families have their own bathroom. This means that more than 600 million Indians don't have access to a toilet. So many Indians defecate in the streets and accumulate more and more filth in the country. Rivers, dumps, and even sidewalks turn into improvised bathrooms. In India's poorest slums, the situation is even more surreal. 1,500 people sharing a single bathroom. This is a perfect environment for the spread of diseases. Nipah virus, dengue, hepatitis, malaria. These are just some of the threats that Indians face daily. And it's not just basic sanitation that's precarious. Indian cities seem to be fighting a losing battle against the forces of nature. With every heavy rain, entire streets are submerged. Unlike other countries, where floods are rare events, in India they are almost routine. And the worst part, after each disaster, bodies are left exposed for days, creating the perfect scenario for epidemic. The Indian government is not blind to these problems. There are efforts to improve the situation, whether through education or infrastructure. But India faces a unique challenge. It's a country where each state has almost total independence. This means that the central government often can't effectively implement national policy. Number 1. Bangladesh. You thought the situation in India was bad. Brace yourself. Bangladesh elevates pollution and lack of sanitation to almost unimaginable levels. It's as if the entire country were a huge open-air slum. On the streets of Dhaka, the capital, scenes that would shock even the most hardened observer are routine. Men and women relieving themselves in broad daylight without any privacy or hygiene. Garbage and sewage accumulate in stinking mountains, turning entire streets into rivers of filth. Now imagine all this under a scorching heat of 40 or 50 degrees Celsius. It's as if hell itself had materialized on Earth. The smell, a nauseating mixture of decomposing garbage and open sewage, is inescapable. But why has Bangladesh reached this point? The answer lies in the numbers. With over 160 million inhabitants squeezed into a territory smaller than the state of São Paulo, Bangladesh is the most densely populated country in the world. To give you an idea, Bangladesh's population density is about 9 times higher than China's. This overpopulation creates unbearable pressure on resources. Water, for example, is a precious and increasingly rare commodity. Rivers, which should be sources of life, become open sewers. Industries dump their waste directly into waterways without any treatment. This results in an unprecedented water crisis, where finding drinking water is a daily challenge for millions of people. The lack of infrastructure further aggravates the problem. Garbage collection systems? Practically non-existent. Garbage is thrown on the streets, burned in the open air, or simply dumped into river. Public toilets? A luxury that few know. Women are forced to relieve themselves in public. Situation that goes beyond the issue of hygiene, affecting human dignity. The consequences for public health catastrophic. Diseases that have long been eradicated in other countries are still common in Bangladesh. Worse still, the country's health system is completely unprepared to deal with this sanitary crisis. Hospitals are few and poorly equipped, making access to basic medical care a privilege for few. Bangladesh's health system often proves overwhelmed when facing public health events, such as infectious diseases. This makes it difficult to effectively control the spread of epidemic. Quality and reach of medical services are limited, making it challenging for the country to deal with large-scale health crises. The precarious conditions in Bangladesh are a direct result of the country's extreme poverty. In fact, most of the poor conditions around the world have their roots in poverty. Without financial resources, it's practically impossible to establish and maintain an adequate public health and basic sanitation system. Now I want to know from you. Well, comment below to let me know. That's it, and see you next time. Curious one. Which of these countries shocked you the most when you learned how dirty they are?